In this video, Jordan Peterson talks about marriage and divorce.
Right, well, exactly. Well, the other thing too is you can be sure that in a relationship where there's no conflict, nothing is being decided. Because thought is conflict, even if you do it by yourself. You know, and so if there are two of you in a boat and you're trying to decide where you're going in the future, it's not like that's self-evident. There has to be some, you have to have an opinion and your partner has to have an opinion, and there's no reason at all to assume that those opinions either will be or should be the same. And then, you know, you hope the relationship is solid enough so that it can withstand the tension of the conflict. One of the things Jung said about marriage, which I thought was, because Jung did a very nice job of trying to understand from a psychological perspective why in the world you should bother being married, which is really a very interesting question. You know, and one of the things he said was that you don't need to tie two things together if they'll just stay together of their own accord. So the fact that marriage is a human universal, which it is, indicates that there is enough tension within intimate relationships, centrifugal tension, to blow them apart. And some of that's just because people are different and they clash, but it's also because as you go through life in a single boat, you encounter huge waves and you might get swamped, so it's a big problem. His point was that the marriage vow was necessary because if your response to potential conflict was, I can leave, you can't have the conflict. You can't have the conflict. You know, if on the other hand, you're with someone and you think, there's no bloody way I can get rid of you no matter what I do short of murder, I'm stuck with you for the next 30 years, then we better work this out. And so that makes he thought of that as a container within which a transformation could take place. It was an alchemical motif. And that without that pressure, people weren't going to be sufficiently motivated to really hash out problems. And, you know, you can think of that in whatever way you want, but I thought it was an absolutely brilliant observation.
Sorry, in light of that, do you think that divorce is too readily considered? I know that's kind of a tangential question. But well,
the problem is it doesn't solve any problems usually, because for a variety of reasons. And one is, it's probably you and not your partner anyways, or at least there's a 50-50 chance, and if it's you, you're just going to bring your stupidity to the next relationship and torture someone else to death. You know, so that's a big problem. The next problem is that if you can't work out the bugs in this relationship, why do you think you're going to be able to do it in the next relationship, especially now that you're older and more set in your ways? The third is, well, you know, what about the kids? The fourth is, I don't know if you've ever seen people in a protracted custody battle, but if you want to ruin your life, that's a really good way of doing it, because that'll take you out for about 15 years, and it'll cost you pretty much all your money. And it'll destroy your closest relationships. It'll also make it virtually impossible for you to be happy with the next person that you're with, because they're going to be, you know, burdened by this absolute catastrophe that's surrounding you with regards to how you organize your interrelationships with the people that you love. So generally speaking, I don't think that it usually solves the problem. Now, sometimes it does, but my sense is it's probably introduced more problems than it's solved. You know, so I mean, one of the things you might note, for example, is that the only people who now get married are people who are relatively wealthy. You know, the fact that we've disrupted the structure of marriage as an institution since about 1965, say, what that has meant is that its benefits are now only available to people who are privileged. So you can look up the stats yourself, but if you're middle class and above, the divorce rates haven't moved much since the early 70s. If you're working class and below, it's a complete catastrophe. And what that's meant is that many children who are in rougher socioeconomic straits are being raised by a single person who is absolutely and 100% overwhelmed by their multiple commitments, right? Full-time responsibility for children, and generally in employment in an extraordinarily dismal, low-paying, unstable, and exploitative job. So, to me, if you're like you guys are, you're all going to be middle class or above in all likelihood. It's fine for you. It's not going to make a bloody bit of difference, all things considered. But for people who are poor, it's just been a catastrophe. So, okay. So, yes.
how we would about the institution of marriage in the 60s or 70s?
Oh, well, there's all sorts of reasons. I mean, first of all, it's become socially acceptable, right? Divorce wasn't socially acceptable. And you can say, well, that was pretty hard on people who wanted to get divorced. It's like, yeah, obviously. Any rule is hard on people that break it, but that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be rules. You know, now what rules there should be, that's a whole different issue. Out of wedlock childbirth has become a norm. It was absolutely rare in the early 1960s, vanishingly rare, and that's become, it's acceptable. Even though all the evidence suggests, like if you actually look at the evidence, it's absolutely clear that kids who have two parents do better than kids who have one. Now, you know, people, when you tell people that, they'll tell you an anecdote about someone they knew, maybe their own parent, who did a wonderful job of raising them as a single person. It's like, the anecdotes are irrelevant. What's relevant is the bulk of the evidence. Of course there are situations where people are better apart than together, and of course there are situations where one person can do a better job than two people who are at each other's throats. But it's aggregate examples that you use when you're doing a scientific survey, and the results of those surveys are crystal clear. You know, the other thing that's going to happen, it's going to happen very soon, is that there's going to be a very, 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 very large number of elderly people who are alone. And being elderly and alone, like no family, that is not something you want to look forward to, especially when you start thinking that you're going to be elderly for like 40 years. So, you know, because say it starts around 65, I don't know how long you guys are going to live, but it's probably 95 is not an unreasonable estimate, and it might be longer than that. So, because, you know, we're adding about 3 months to the total lifespan every year. Right. That's the rate of technological improvement in relationship to overall mortality. So, you know, and that, the degree to which we're adding that extra lifespan is increasing each year, you know, and it may get to the point where we're increasing lifespan a year every year. Now I doubt it, because it'll probably be an asymptote, but it has been increasing for a very long period of time. So, you know, it's one thing to think about the maximization of day-to-day freedom when you're between, say, 15 and 40, 45. After that, that's a whole different story. But modern people never think about the last half of their life. You know, so why, I don't know, but maybe they're afraid to or something, but